Okay, welcome everyone to the 53rd Hands-on Agile meetup. Today I'm really excited that we can welcome Bob Galen to the meetup here. And Bob will be telling about an Agile Coach's Guide to Storytelling. And I'm really very excited about this. So he will use a bit of breakout rooms, so you will have to stretch a bit. But it'll be awesome. Bob, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Stefan. Good afternoon, good evening, welcome everyone. I'm Bob Galen, and I really appreciate Stefan inviting me to this session. And like he alluded to, we're going to have, I'm going to ask everyone, please don't leave. It's not fearful breakout rooms, but we're going to do some breakout room activity later on that I think will really complement the discussion that we're having. So I wanted to talk about an Agile Coach's Guide to Storytelling. It's something that I've always done as part of my coaching, and this is a new talk for me. I think this is the first time I've done aspects of it in different classes, but this is the first time I've talked about it within a coaching context. And I think it's an important one. It's been a difference maker for me in my coaching, and I hope I can invite or inspire some of you to weave this into your Agile coaching. And that's not just for people with Agile coaching in their title, but anyone who does any coaching, so Scrum Masters, etc. So I'm hoping that this is more general purpose. I want you to start getting some images. So I think it helps to get images in your minds. You can even close your eyes. Just temporarily, don't close your eyes for the entire session, but you can close your eyes and envision storytellers that you've had in the past. I have some images here. The Old West in the U.S., cowboys around a fire, and someone is telling a story. There's a storyteller in the gray with students talking about stories. One of the things, you can see the expressive nature. So I think of storytelling as not just verbal, but it's sort of body language comes into play and tone comes into play with your storytelling. And I want you all to start putting yourselves in these pictures, becoming a storyteller. And then I love bands. Probably none of you are all too young for me, so none of you will remember any of these bands, but one is Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, is an American band, an acoustic band, and I think of them as being consummate storytellers and in song. And then other song-based storytellers, if any of you have ever heard of these folks, Billy Joel, storyteller, Piano Man, his Piano Man story. Really, whenever I hear that song, I almost picture myself at a smoky bar, putting dollar bills in a jar. I think that rhymed. Cats in the Cradle, Cary Chapin, Jim Croce, Bob Dylan. I get the same imagery with Bob Dylan when he's talking, when he's doing his stories, Tangled Up in Blue. I can almost picture that. And then maybe to come a little bit more modern, I think of animated storytelling. If any of you have seen any of these movies, maybe they resonate. Any of you with children, maybe your children have seen these movies or not. One that moved me was Up. I don't know if anyone recognize Up. I remember when I first saw Up, it was so heartwarming and it was sad. It evoked emotions in me. A good story, I think, it connects to you. It connects to your emotions. It connects to your heart. It might connect to your soul. So some of these. One of my favorite is Storks, I think, and those two wolves. There's a little bit of a wolf scene in there where wolves are very creative. And if anyone's ever seen that, and it's just, I laugh every time I see that segment of the movie, the storytelling. Everyone with me on images. You want to project, you want to get images in your mind. Storytelling is not just reading. I think when I'm preparing my stories, I'm trying to capture the feeling at a time. I'm trying to evoke things. It's remarkable, or at least remarkable to me. And why is it remarkable? And I'm trying to get into a position where I can communicate that to the audience, to whoever's listening to me. There's quite a few books on storytelling techniques. I just picked this one because it's one of my favorite in Agile contexts. Stephen Denning wrote this, The Leader's Guide to Storytelling, and it does have a flavor towards leadership, and I think it would have also a flavor towards Agile coaches in those contexts, in business contexts, in organizational contexts. and he gives some guidance around story. What does story look like? And one of the things that he does that I particularly find valuable is he brings this notion in of narrative patterns or narrative. And so storytelling, you can think of narrating a story, a narrative pattern. And he talks about stories having an identity or patterns. Not all of these are useful. I find but most of these are useful, like motivational stories. A lot of times I talk to coaches and they talk about, I need to motivate a team to do this, or I need to motivate a team to do that, almost like they're taking the action on the team. Like it's something I need to turn a switch on the team. And that's not my experience. I don't think teams are switchable. But what you can do is you can tell a story that inspires action, that perhaps potentially motivates action, to ignite implementation of new ideas. Another early story as a coach, I think early in a relationship with a team or an individual, whoever you're coaching, is building trust, building relationship. Maybe I would reframe that to building relationship and building a trustful relationship. You can tell stories to do that. Like, why are you coaching? Why am I a good coach for you? Let me tell you a story. Maybe it's a story of why am I not, like a failure story that would show some vulnerability to establish relationship with a coaching client. I don't know about building trust in the company. I would skip that one. Transmitting your values, storytelling to transmit your values. You can share Scrum values and characteristics, or you can share a story that illustrates your application of them in your life. I would argue that the story is going to be more powerful than you just showing a slide or listing them, right? Because you're evoking that connection, you're evoking that vulnerability. You can talk about that. Getting others working together, sharing knowledge, not maybe so much taming the grapevine, but then creating and sharing your vision as a coach. What is your vision for Agile in the organization? If you have an evangelist dynamic in your role. So Denny talks about these different patterns. I think they're useful. Like, we're not telling stories to just tell stories. Stories should have a purpose. They should have an identity. They should have a focus, if that makes sense to everyone. So these narrative patterns can help focus in. Why am I telling this story? What is the purpose of it? A part of this talk is just to sensitize all of you into this notion of a story and to make it important, almost to make it as important as a user story. If I can joke a little bit, the ubiquitous user story, can we elevate storytelling to that same level of value? I'm just kidding a little bit. Jobs talked about the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, the values, the agenda of an entire generation to come. I know that may sound grand, but I really think that is indicative of the power of a story well told, not perfectly told. One of the things that I hear from a lot of coaches when we're talking about storytelling, there's resistance to say, well, I'm not good enough, or I'm not a good storyteller, or I have no stories to tell, which I violently disagree with. We all have stories to tell. We may not have mined our experience for those stories and practice telling them, but we all have tellable units, tellable experiences that can be very impactful and shared with others. But again, it's that resistance we don't. And Jobs is really saying that is your avenue to influence change as a coach, to influence your clients, not being so prescriptive, if you will. So I want to just hit you with a few storytelling basics. These are just according to me. These are things that I've found useful. Feel free to take screenshots. There's one screenshot that I do want you to take that might be useful, and I'll tell you when that is. And again, you'll get the slides. I talked to Stefan, and you'll have a video, and I'll make sure you get the slides as well. But just for this, it's sort of a toolkit. It might help you in the breakout rooms to grab a few of these screenshots. So Oreo cookie, there's different names for this, but this is the tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them approach. Some people call it a sandwich or an Oreo cookie, with two sides, the beginning, the middle, and the end. That's a very useful metaphor or framework to think about when you're telling your stories. It's ancient, but it's useful. The Pareto principle in crossing the chasm, a mistake that often people make is they try to tell a story and target everyone so that the story resonates with the entire audience. I try to hit the middle of the audience. I try not to tell a story. I mean, it's wonderful if it connects with everyone, but it's very difficult to connect with everyone. So try to connect with the majority if you can. You can. Now, you do want to check are you connecting with your audience? One of the things that I'm changing, did everyone notice that I have very old or mature bands and mature movies in the beginning of this? And as I get older and I get more generational diversity in my audience, people won't know, no one will understand those bands, those artists anymore. So you may have to upgrade your stories. I'm currently upgrading my stories to version 22 so that I can connect to different audiences. Clarify and listen. Watch the body language that's going on. Use humor. If you think you're humorous, you try to use humor if you can to connect. Add situational context. Connect the story to the audience if you can. Connect it to something that some people have experienced, particularly if you're in organizational storytelling. You have project examples that are very ripe, success stories, failure stories, rising from the ashes stories that you can reference. A visualization, like I said, try to paint a picture with your words and with your hands if you can. And not for everyone, but if you can sort of help people visualize. Be yourself. One of the mistakes I made as a storyteller many years ago is I tried to, if anyone's ever heard of Joanna Rothman, this is my favorite story about failure, is Joanna Rothman is a consultant. And early in my career, I tried to model myself after her style as a consultant, as a public speaker. And I tried to tell stories the way Joanna tells stories, and I failed I failed miserably. But at least quickly I realized I had to find my own style. So don't try to copy other folks, but use them as inspiration to then center and find your own style. Types and flows. There's different story types or archetypes. And you don't want to necessarily hit all of these, but thinking of your stories, you may want to sort of identify, hey, what kind of archetype, what kind of flow, what type of story is this? So vision stories, principle stories, values in action, not just value stories, but values, Scrum values in action. Courage in action. How cool would it be if you shared a story of a team that showed real courage and you could capture that and share that with other teams as you were coaching? Who am I stories? Your Agile why. I think it's really important for all of us to be able to articulate, our Genesis stories, or who am I? Why am I here? Why am I doing what am I doing? Why should you care stories? Why should you care about what I'm saying? What's in it for you? What's in it for you stories? I know what you're thinking stories. Sometimes I like to do this as a little twist. I know no one is buying storytelling. There's no time for storytelling. I know what you're thinking, but that's wrong. This storytelling is a fundamental communication device for coaches and for leaders. I'm just kidding. Success and failure stories, Phoenix Rising I talked about, major turning points. Part of storytelling, if you can take folks on a journey. I started here. I learned something. I failed. Then for 2 years, we tried it this way. We were in waterfall. A new leader came in. They made the pivot to try Agile for the second time, but we tried it differently. We used some different approaches to it. Then we failed again. Oh, this is a sad story. But then we rose again. So you can take, not on a terribly long journey, but take the listeners on a journey and have teaching stories. Teaching stories. This is how I've learned this. Anyone ever hear the term, I learned this the hard way? Anyone ever say that? I learned this the hard way. Well, tell a story about what the hard way was, right? What was the hard way? What framed that? Have that story in your back pocket. Have that story in your storytelling index and be able to pull it out. Be able to pull these things out. You don't need thousands of stories, but you need some story nuggets to be able to pull out situationally and then reframe them for the situation at hand. It can be an incredibly useful skill. Talking about adjusting, one of the failure points is telling the story the same way to everyone. Anyone ever have a grandfather that tells a story the same? Joanna, I'm starting to do this myself to my grandchildren, and they're calling me on it. It's actually quite embarrassing. They start finishing the story for me. You know that I've told it too many times, but that doesn't deter me. I continue to tell the story because it makes me, but I've lost my audience. The only audience is me because my granddaughters have tuned me out. So adjusting for your audience, you want to become, one of the challenges in storytelling is finding those nuggets. But one of the next challenges for me that you need to practice is targeting those stories, reframing those stories for the situation and the audience. So sensing and targeting your audience in real time, what's working, what's not. Don't get judgmental, but just discard what's not working. Oh, I tried this story with leaders, or I was coaching a senior leader and this story landed flat. Well, think about that offline. Why did it land flat? Maybe you want to eliminate it and not target any leaders with it. Or maybe you were actually talking about teams too much. Maybe you didn't make it relevant for the context of that leader. And you could retarget, you could pivot the story. Embellishing too much, exaggerating, you want to embellish. You want to have some dramatic license. I personally like to overact a bit with my stories. And then if I sense the audience, I've overdone it, I'll pull back a little bit. Oh, I overacted. I was sort of like Jack Nicholson in most of his movies. I overacted too much. I have to pivot back and calm down a little bit. Pausing, using the power of silence, not rushing. Pacing in your storytelling is really important. And leveraging, the power of the pause to let folks catch up with you or to let folks think about what you said. Don't be reluctant to repeat yourself. Important points. Don't be reluctant. If it's the whole point of the story, you may want to say it multiple times. I like a story arc. If some of you have attended some of my sessions, I talk about coaching arcs, and this is similar. It's a story arc. And to me, good stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Does that make sense to everyone? I like a chess metaphor. So opening moves, middle game, and end game. One of the most important things I found in storytelling is to stick the landing. In fact, almost the most important part, bar none. I mean, it's important to open the story properly, but even if you open it poorly or you have a poor middle game, if you stick the landing, if you stick the point, if you really resonate the landing, the story is worthwhile. People will forget the poor beginning and middle if you have a wonderful ending. Now, I do think it's important to have a good opening moves as well. So then connect that to the ending, to the end game. The middle sometimes doesn't matter as much. Yes, you want to have a wonderful arc, but important, stick the landing and then have a powerful opening that grabs people's attention to then allow you to stick the landing. So there's this arc to a story. Even if it's an elevator pitch, if you've ever heard that term, like a short story, a 5-minute story, you still want to sort of apply the arc to that thinking. The letters mean tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, right? That's what the letters mean there. Very often in the beginning, you might want to tell a joke. You might want to show some vulnerability. You want to set the stage. Why are we here? I like to show vulnerability in the beginning. Sometimes I'll ask an open-ended question. That's a wonderful way for an opening move. We're going to talk about project failures. Does anyone remember Project Bob Galen? That phenomenal failure 20 years ago? Yeah, how many people remember that? Show of hands. Oh, that was terrible, wasn't it? It was absolutely atrocious. Everyone keep that in your mind because we're going to talk about how do we avoid Project Bob Galen because we never want to repeat that again. What I tried to sort of role model there is a fairly interactive opening move to set the stage to the landing, if you will. This is something called the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. I'm not going to explain the wheel, but I am going to use some stances in the wheel to talk about some story types. And that's why I have it here. I like the metaphor because it supports this notion of becoming a well-rounded storyteller as a coach. Everyone with me? So just the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. You can look it up. There's a link there. You can do research if you're not aware of it. And it's not just for coaches. It's for anyone. I think it's anyone who's doing coaching. It's a good framework to at least be aware of. Now what I want to do, though, is I want to talk about areas of the wheel and what kind of, or stances in the wheel, and what kind of stories might we tell to support that stance in a coaching conversation. All right. So self-mastery, and I'm not going to read everyone, But self-mastery is the hub of the wheel. Self-mastery, think of it as self-awareness. Think of it as coaching from the inside out. I'm practicing what I preach. I'm walking my talk. So how can I communicate my self-mastery to a client? How can I balance that? I could just talk, or I could try to tell some stories. I could have a story of my mentoring, my journey, and how this competency has grown, how I've been working. Marco and I know each other, and I've talked, I think, occasionally to Marco about my journal. I've attended coaching classes and the effect that they've had on me and my coaching style. I've shown some vulnerability in doing that. I've shown some transparency in doing that. Stories of how you become more empathetic over time, mistakes you've made. I found that nothing engenders or connects you to folks more than sharing your weaknesses, sharing your mistakes. Well, very often it's uncomfortable to do that, but I think it connects us because we all have common ground. We have success common ground, and we've made some mistakes. So that could connect us on self-mastery. This would be in a coaching conversation. Everyone with me? Instead of asking someone 1,000 questions, yes, you could ask them 1,000 powerful questions. That's fine. But you could also inject a story every once in a while, an opportunistic story to make a point, to connect in relationships in your coaching. There's different stances in the wheel, and I'm just going to be pulling out the different stances. What if I'm doing guide learning teaching? Consider this coach as teacher. Everyone with me? So this is me adopting a coaching stance. Can I use stories in this context? Stories behind the genesis of the Agile Manifesto. I could have a slide and I could talk about 17 middle-aged men meeting on a mountaintop in Idaho and rum. There was much alcohol involved in crafting a vision for the original manifesto. Everyone, I could read the manifesto, I could give it to a coaching client, or I could share a story about it, or how a team misused story points and what they're doing now. There's a wonderful teaching moment. They're talking about story points. And instead of just explaining what they are, I might talk about how they're well used and some of the huge mistakes I've experienced. So I'm sharing an experience. I'm teaching, but in the form of a story. Right? Everyone with me, catching up. I am using story to support a stance, a coaching stance. Who taught me to be an Agile coach? What were the early days like? To be honest, everyone, I taught myself to be an Agile coach, so I can only blame myself. So every morning when I wake up, this is me trying humor. Every morning when I wake up, I yell at myself in the mirror because I'm the one who made me come. It was the school of hard knocks until I found mentors. When I started doing Agile, there weren't a lot of coaches around. So I don't even think it was a role per se. So I was learning sort of on my own with trial and error. Mentoring. You're mentoring someone one-on-one. I think storytelling is a wonderful device, a wonderful communication device to mentor someone. You could share a story of what worked for you and what hasn't in a general sense. Stories of or from your own specific mentors. Talk about the mentors that have shaped your life. Who has shaped you? Like, be able to tell that story. Why are you the way you are? Who has shaped you? I talked about Joanna Rothman earlier. You've just learned something new about me. So it was an early shaping, and then I unshaped, and then I reshaped myself. Stories that map to your mentee's challenges and growth opportunities. You could have motivation stories. It takes some time. Let me explain to you. The mentee is only seeing your experience now. You could share a story of how hard you worked to gain your experience now. It requires some patience. It's not something that you're going to master overnight. In fact, you're doing very well. Let me tell you a story. At the level of experience that you're at, I was making these mistakes and you're not making them. So again, storytelling, framing storytelling to become a device that you can use in coaching. Now, please don't make this coaching conversation all about your stories. Does everyone understand? This is an important point. If you have a 1 hour coaching conversation, it should not be 1 hour of your story, okay? We're still using storytelling to serve the client, but it's a new tool in your toolbox that you're pulling out to communicate more effectively, to connect with them. So you want to be diligent about when and where and how much, but you want to be prepared to do it. You need to have those stories to tell. Facilitation. if I'm facilitating a meeting. I could talk about stories of my favorite facilitation tactics if I'm talking to some facilitators, how to plan for a specific facilitation challenge, stories of failure, stories of your facilitation learning journey, how you've gotten here. So if you're coaching someone you're facilitating a session, advising, you're providing consulting or advice. I use storytelling probably the major part of my advisory stance. When I'm a coach as advisor or coach as consultant, I am not telling people, do it this way. I am typically communicating options to folks, experiential options, and I'm usually doing that in the form of stories. I've seen this work this way under these conditions, but then I've seen it equally fail under these different conditions. So your mileage is going to vary. The rub is trying to pick it situationally. So stories that are similar to your client's current situation, stories that explain and explore various options, like I was saying. This is where your sharing your experience can be incredibly helpful. Instead of telling someone, do it this way or don't do that, did you follow the Scrum guide or don't follow the Scrum guide? You could share your Scrum stories from the point of view of providing advice. You can even share your indirect hearsay stories. I do this all the time. I was at a conference. This is what I heard at the conference. I was talking to a bunch of coaches, and I heard these trends. I'll be clear, this is indirect experience, but these are from trusted folks. And this is what we're seeing in regulated industries. This is what seems to be working, and this is what seems to be not working. And let me tell you about John Deere and share a story about some learnings at John Deere. And then coaching stance. Even in coaching stance, which is typically more question-based, there may be opportunities for you to share some stories. Talking about in the beginning when you're establishing a relationship, you may want to explain what coaching is and is not. Everyone with me? One of the first things you may want to do in a coaching relationship with a new client, a new team, or a new client is they may not know what coaching is and what it is not. You could have a PowerPoint is and isn't slide or a handout, or you could share a story about what it is and isn't. Let me share a story with what coaching is. Coaching is asking lots of questions. I did this with a client of mine last week. What I found is I overdid the questions. They got a little bored over time with too many questions. So, and then I talked to them about, well, that's coaching stance. Do you want me to switch to an advising stance? And they were like welcoming that. Okay, so what do you think about that? So I'm sharing a coaching story to sort of illustrate some dynamics of coaching. A story about how I learned to be more coachable. What if you have a client that's resisting your coaching? You could poke at them. I sometimes talk about how I struggle being coachable myself. Listening, be trusting, having relationship. It's not easy. Being egoless and really trusting my coach to give me advice, or going along when I don't see the end purpose to the questions. Am I coachable? And then talking about the power of metaphor, maybe by explaining how metaphor has helped me. Again, you're weaving stories light-handed, not heavy-handed, into your coaching stances, into your coaching activity. You're mining your experience. You're not making things up, but you are showing engagement. Everyone, what's dangerous about storytelling is you're sharing bits of yourself, right? Very often as a coach, we're abstracted from the client. We want to be abstracted. We don't want to have skin in the game, right? Marco, have you ever felt, hey, I want to just coach from the outside because the closer I get, the more dangerous it can be sometimes. Storytelling sort of gets a little bit closer. You're sharing experiences, right? You don't want to be too close, but you do want to share that. There's a little bit of skin in the game to it. And then leading. If you're in leading stance, again, all of these stances come from the growth wheel. Leading stance is another one of those stances where I think storytelling can be incredibly effective. From coach as leader, coach leading by example, role modeling. Any questions?
We have a few in the parking lot, but they are so well put, we could use them as closing. So,
all right, everyone, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have 2 breakouts. This is part one. We're going to put you into breakouts, like I said, of 4 to 5, not 10 minutes, but 8 minutes. For all of you, grab a piece of paper, share it amongst yourselves, and I want you to collaborate, and I want you to create what I'm going to call a snorri, a story snippet library. Everyone know what a snippet is? It's a small piece. It's a story idea. It's a short idea. It's not writing the entire story down, but it's an idea for a story. It's enough of an idea that then you could develop a story later from it. So I want you to, in the room, so the first challenge in storytelling is creating a short library or a long library of these story ideas. The central idea or theme of your story, you want to capture that. The message you're trying to convey. So each snippet has the central theme, the message, the context, and then the opening and the close. Everyone with me? You might capture an opening and a close, an idea. You're trying to make it short and sweet. If you can, keep it as short and sweet as you can, because I want you to accumulate as many ideas as you can in 8 minutes. Try to pick some important stories and think about your coaching conversations, whether you're a leader, whether you're a coach, whether you're a scrum master. What are typical conversations and what might be some story ideas that you can weave into your conversations? And these are for you. But you can work together as a group. If someone else has a wonderful idea, you might feed off of that idea. Everyone with me? So you're just brainstorming story snippets, useful ones that you can envision using, opening move. What might you say at the beginning, and what is the landing? What is the message you're trying to leave them with? So let's go to your rooms.
Okay, off we go.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Let me look at the faces. I want to see if did anyone actually not survive the breakout room? Is anyone? So some people are even smiling. Good. All right. So that part one was to just start the process. I'm hoping you continue that process of finding story snippet ideas, and in your effort to become a storyteller, to really, and to weave that into part of your coaching or part of your job or part of your role. But now I want to give everyone 5 minutes. So I'm going to turn it around, ask Stefan, same rooms if we can, and open them for 5 minutes. I want to invite everyone to practice one story. And here's the format I want to use. So what I want you to do is use this format no matter how many people are in your room, but I want someone to play the role of the story receiver, even if it's a team, and someone to play the role of the storyteller, and everyone else in the room observe and take notes about how well it went or what the storyteller could do to improve. So you have 5 minutes to do one story elevator pitch, to practice an actual story together, to get feedback. So the roles are storyteller, story receiver, and that's an acting role. That's an improv role. And then everyone else is just sort of observing and taking notes. You have about 3 minutes for an elevator pitch and 2 minutes for the retro. So just be playful with it. Just have fun with it. And in 5 minutes, I'll see you back and we'll land the ship.
Okay, so I'll get you back in 5 minutes. Prepare. And
do a story. Force yourselves. But volunteer someone in the room. So one person tell the story and do a simulation. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. So I just wanted to see, we'll do some questions, but have a shout out from some of the rooms. Just have folks come off mute. Any comments from the rooms? Anything you learned? What worked? What didn't? What did you like? Ideas? Either from the story, part 1 or part 2. So Femi, what do you got?
Yeah, part 2 was probably a lot more interesting. Or maybe I should say part 1 was equally interesting. I'm not quite sure. Let me start with part 1. What I got there was how the tonality of voice can actually convey that cliffhanger moment in your story. Just by listening to the voice, you kind of feel excited to hear the tonality of the voice. Part two, equally important is the fact that stories have phases they go through. There's highs and lows, there's ups and downs, there's good and bad, and you just ride with the story. And that's me.
I love that. Thank you. Svenja, did you have something to share with everyone?
Yeah, unluckily, actually, my partner was muted and off the screen, so I had the pleasure to talk with myself for 5 minutes. But I caught myself doing a lot of M's and, like trying to fill in the gaps like M. And that is not the sexy trait when you would talk to your team. So get the M's out and maybe just pause instead, just not saying something. Yeah.
I think that's a practice. What I'm taking away is practice. I've done some practice just in mirrors as well. I mean, it's both. I've practiced elevator pitches. I mean, I prefer doing it with an audience in sort of a dojo or an improv fashion. It's better with people. But if I don't have that, I even practice storytelling in my head. If I haven't practiced it, I'll do it before I deliver it, and I'll just go through the arc really quickly. Esther, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, that sounds correct. Thanks. Just a comment based on what Svenja already mentioned, that I'm not in this uncomfortable situation, but I have to get the feedback a number of times from different levels of managers that please go back to your meeting, listen to yourself, and try to improve. And I like believing that I'm not one of them, but the number of and I don't know and whatnot, it's always good to revisit, especially if there's a recording, look it back, and that's the best feedback you can get.
Absolutely. And I want everyone to be really kind to yourselves. This is something you're not going to master in 2 days or 2 months. It's something to really just work at over time. And be patient with yourself. But practice makes, not perfect, but practice makes you much more masterful. And I'm speaking from my own experience. Any other, Femi, your hand is still up. I see it. I don't know if you have anything else to offer. Any other reactions? How about questions from chat?
So we have the first one. How can you utilize stories in agile coaching without being prescriptive?
I don't see the nature. I mean, when you're telling your story, I hope you're not saying, this is my story and I expect you to do it this way. I think you stop by just sharing your story, everyone. If that makes sense to you? So don't take that prescriptive leap. Just talk about what's worked for you. What hasn't worked for you. Your mileage will vary. Very often when I'm in a consulting stance, I'm doing stories. It's really option exploration. I'm talking about options, what I've seen work and what I've seen not work. But ultimately, the decision is up to I'm going to use the client. Whoever you're coaching is your client, whether it's a team or an individual. It's up to the client to make those decisions. So it's not up to us to be prescriptive. But again, storytelling can help connect to the client. You could ask the client to communicate a story that you could relate to. Everyone with me? So it's not one way. It's not one way. Tell me your story about what success looks like. Let me tell you my story about what success looks like. What if we integrate those stories, right? How wonderful that communication might be. But please don't prescribe unless someone's going to make a dangerous step. I think prescription is okay. Maybe 0.0001% of the time. If someone is going to do something that might be fatal, I think you might want to be prescriptive. Just kidding. So, any other questions?
Yes, there's another one. Any tips to get over the feeling of people don't want to hear about me and my stories, they just want the facts?
I understand that. And so maybe shorten your stories and have more fact-based stories. But damn it, I would say, tell your stories. I mean, it's an effective communication. So on the one hand, you may want to make it tight and targeted to those people. Remember, I was talking about targeting your stories, but at the same time, I wouldn't stop storytelling. I'm going to say something really odd. I think they need to hear your stories in your context. Those stories are data points. They are experiences. Now, this may be coming from a dinosaur. I'm going to continue to tell my stories. And I'm not always going to measure their value by the immediate response. I do tailor them, unless it's to my granddaughters. When it's to my granddaughters, then I have to tailor my stories. But Other than that, I think don't let the environment shut down your storytelling. Look for willing participants.
Bob, do we have time for another question? It's the last one.
One more?
When you are an introverted Scrum Master struggling with ad hoc verbal creativity, how do you improve storytelling?
I love that. That's a wonderful question. So I am incredibly introverted. And so I started my storytelling journey probably 25 years ago. I don't know if this is motivational to anyone, probably not. It's probably demotivational. It's taken me 20 years of hard work to get comfortable with public speaking, and I'm still sick. I still get nauseous before every public speaking or storytelling example because of that introversion. What I'm trying to say is just practice, just breathe, get a safe environment of folks, and just work on it as a skill, and get feedback and see what happens. See if you start getting magic with your clients, magic in your teams, if you start seeing effectivity. So just try it. That's it. Stefan, thank you so very much for having me.
Thank you so very much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. It was an exciting topic, and I believe an underestimated topic, and we should put a bit more effort into it. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there. Tell your stories. Everyone, think of your first story. Start telling your story.
Take care, stay healthy, and come back next time.